Today is Monday, November 29th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And thankfully today I had a topic in mind that I wanted to talk about, and a student in the Academy happened to write this morning and ask a question that related to that topic, so I feel like the need to address this topic today is confirmed. What I'd like to talk about is what real learning is, how we go about obtaining real learning or real wisdom, and then I'd like to apply that a bit to the Christian life. So the topic will be, what is real wisdom, and how does the knowledge of what real wisdom is affect the Christian life? Before I even get into that, I want to ask you to remember Aristotle's teaching, which I discussed in a previous talk, the last talk I published. Aristotle's teaching that human society divides into three different types of people: the vulgar, the political, and the contemplative. And I explained how in democratic society, many who consider themselves political, or most who consider themselves political, who are merely involved in democratic political controversies, are actually vulgar, but they imagine themselves to be political. Excuse me. And so we have to keep Aristotle's divisions of society in mind, because it's very helpful. There's the vulgar, whose lives, no matter how they're organized or what they do, what kind of activities they're involved in, no matter what line of work they're in, the vulgar are those who live for the sake of pleasure. The things that they do are done in hope of obtaining some carnal comfort or temporal benefit, and they really don't take thought for much beyond that. If you go to work so you can earn a paycheck, and there's really no more value in the work that you do other than getting a paycheck, and if you were not able to get that paycheck, you would stop doing it, you're living a vulgar life. You're only working for the sake of money, which is the means to purchase vulgar pleasures. You can't purchase wisdom. You can't purchase honor. And if you're living for the sake of obtaining money, no matter what you say about yourself, if at the end of the day, when someone looks at your daily schedule, looks at what you do, they see a life that can only be explained as a pursuit of money, then you're living a vulgar life. If you look beyond pleasure to concerns for honor or your legacy, even virtue, maybe not so much virtue, but honor and a legacy to be remembered. You imagine how great it would be to have a building named after yourself, or to have a statue of yourself after accomplishing some great deeds on earth. And you desire honor. You want to be respected. You're studying so that you can obtain a certain title. You want to be called doctor by other people. You want to write PhD when you sign your name. You want honor. You want respect. You're willing to sacrifice. You're willing to work hard. You're willing to deny yourself vulgar pleasures as you pursue honor. That's what Aristotle defines as the political life, a life of honor. The reason it's called political is because in the ancient world, the work of the political was primarily through military exploits. Think of kings and generals and famous soldiers. They were men who sacrificed vulgar pleasures and vulgar comforts for the sake of honor and duty. Think of King David, for example, saying that he will not lay down in his bed. Or even a better example, Uriah, the Hittite, in the story of David and Bathsheba, he refuses to go to his house because his brothers are at war. That's the life of a man seeking honor, a political man. But then beyond that is the life of the contemplative man. And the contemplative man seeks wisdom. The fault of the vulgar life is that it doesn't fulfill human nature. Man is created for more. And Aristotle says that the life of the vulgar is comparable to the life of cattle. It's a life that's just going about looking for food today, looking for a drink today, looking for shelter today. Body, body, body. It's a life that can only be explained through physical interests. And it's a life shared by animals, by irrational animals. It's not a human life. The political life is almost human because it seeks ends that irrational animals don't necessarily seek, but it's still not perfect. And the reason why the political life is imperfect is because it's a life that will often end in vexation. Because if you live for honor, you're dependent on someone else giving you that honor. And so you're still a dependent. You're not free. You do something and then look around to see if it gets noticed. You do something and you wait for that reward, that certificate, that title, that applause, that recognition. That's the political life. That's the fault of the political life, is that a man who seeks honor is still not free. He's dependent on the judgment of the men from whom he would get honor. But the best life, Aristotle teaches, is the contemplative life. Because in the contemplative life, a man seeks true freedom. He seeks things that he has the power to obtain, and when he obtains them, no one can take them away from him. He possesses them forever. Of course, in the Christian sense, this contemplative life includes saving faith, the knowledge of God, the grace of eternal life, something that no man can take away from a person. Once obtained, we can keep it in our possession forever, because that's the ultimate test of happiness, not just to have something good, but to have it forever. And so we have to remember the divisions of human life: the vulgar, the political, and the contemplative. There's no motivation for the contemplative life except the perfection of happiness itself. The vulgar life and the political life are full of all kinds of sins. They breed all kinds of vices. For example, to be a flatterer is the way of a political man, because through flattery or through bribery, he can obtain honor from men. But the contemplative life offers no artificial motivation. And I talked about this in the last walk talk I did. The contemplative life offers no worldly motivation, often leads a person into great trials and difficulties, which can only be understood, rightly interpreted, appreciated, and made profitable use of by a wise man. Now, the topic I'd like to talk about today is how to obtain real wisdom, what true learning is, how we can attain it, and how it changes our lives. How it changes our lives, how it causes us to live. So remember the three different types of lives: vulgar, political, and contemplative. And understand that only the contemplative is interested in true wisdom. And the question is whether you are going to be a vulgar person who really never does more than seek comfort, safety, pleasure, ease, and so on. And you seek money for the sake of these things. Or whether you're going to be more noble than the vulgar and pursue honor, which we have to acknowledge is more noble, more respectable than a vulgar life. Or whether you're going to actually live out and fulfill your human nature, seek to be truly free, and pursue wisdom, and live a Christian life as a wise man. So let's talk about what wisdom is, how it's obtained, and how it changes our lives. Aristotle explains what wisdom is. He says that wisdom, which he considers to be scientific knowledge, and by scientific knowledge he doesn't mean knowledge in a modern sense of experimental science. He's not talking about being a chemist or working in a laboratory. That's not what Aristotle means by scientific knowledge. What scientific knowledge is, or wisdom in any area, is the knowledge of the elements, principles, and causes of anything. It's the knowledge of the elements, the principles, and the causes of a thing. That's what it means to have wisdom. And wisdom can be applied to many different areas of life. For example, if we take an auto mechanic, if my wife looks at our family van, she sees a white Ford van. She sees 4 wheels. She sees windows. She may know something about the engine, maybe something, she may know that it has an automatic transmission, whatever that means. And that's about all that she knows. Beyond that, it has air conditioning and heating. There's a radio. It has windshield wipers and heater and air and so on. My wife doesn't know our family van. She perceives the van with her senses as a whole. She thinks of it as the van. It's a whole. It's a white Ford van. And that's how she thinks of it, because with respect to automobiles, she does not have scientific knowledge. She does not have wisdom. She really doesn't know what an automobile is. She doesn't know the elements, the principles, or the causes that make an automobile to be an automobile. She looks at it and sees a whole. She perceives it with her senses. She feels the seats. She sees the paint. She hears the engine. She smells the exhaust and so on. She perceives the van as a whole and thinks of it as a whole. And a good example of this would be to think of a matchbox car. If I was to hold up a matchbox car and say to my child, "What is this?" he would say, "It's a car." Well, clearly it's not a car, because it doesn't contain the elements of a car. It's just an image of a car. And the matchbox car represents what an ignorant person thinks about a car. It has all of the features that would be recognized by the ignorant person. And they would look at it and say, "That's a car." Because they don't have wisdom. They think of a car only for its function. You jump in it, turn the key, drive to where you need to go, get in and get out. That's a car. However, if my uncle, who is a professional mechanic, looks at the van, he sees all kinds of different things, thinks about all different kinds of things, has a completely different understanding of the car than my wife does. My uncle could take the car apart and put it back together. My uncle can notice a sound that's not right. He can notice something that's wrong that an average person would never even recognize. And not only can he notice that something is wrong, he can immediately identify the cause of that problem, and he can remove the cause of that problem. He can repair a car that's not operating properly. A mechanic thinks of a car differently than an average person because he has wisdom with respect to automobiles. And how does he obtain this wisdom? He obtains this wisdom by means of analysis. When he looks at the car, or when he originally looked at the car when he was younger, he looked at it in the way that the ignorant look at the car. He looked at it and he saw a whole car. He might say, boy, I really like Ferraris. Check out this Lamborghini. He may have thought about cars, looked at cars, talked about cars as the ignorant do. But as he became interested in mechanics, he had to stop looking at cars from the outside by the senses, and he had to start to take cars apart. He had to take apart the whole and examine the parts of the car. And as he did that, he realizes that every time a part is analyzed, we find more parts inside of it, new parts that we've never seen before, parts that we don't know anything about. And then we have to learn about those parts. And we find out that even those parts are composed of parts. And we continue to analyze and analyze and analyze until we've broken down the automobile into all of its elements. We understand all of its principles. We understand all of the causes of all of the functions of the automobile. From how the blinkers work, to how the transmission changes gears, to how the brakes work, to how the heating and air conditioning work, how the radio works, how the vehicle starts, how the electrical system works. Every different part and system of the automobile is analyzed, is divided, separated into its parts, studied according to its parts, and then reconstructed. That knowledge of the elements, the principles, and the causes of the thing is what gives a person wisdom in that thing. And that's why a master mechanic, he doesn't solve problems in vehicles by trial and error as I would. If I notice that something was wrong about the car, only because it's not working the way it normally does, or it's doing something that's obviously not desirable, like the engine is smoking, or there's a clicking noise under the hood, or a tire is vibrating in a strange way, I can tell that something's not right, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what the cause is. And the way that I would have to try and diagnose the problem is by trial and error. I might look up on a website and say, causes of vibrating wheel. And it might give me a list of 10 possible causes of a vibrating wheel. And I would have to go by trial and error, one possible cause at a time, to try and find what the cause might be. But if my uncle was to look at that list without even looking at the car, he would be able to immediately start crossing off options and say, it can't be that, it's not that, it's not that, it can't be that. And that's even if he had to look at such a list, which he wouldn't. Those lists are for those who don't know. And so we can see the difference between a man who has wisdom with respect to a certain thing and those who don't. And the means by which one obtains that wisdom is by the work of analysis. Analysis to divide the whole, which is what the ignorant see, into its component parts, to then understand the parts, to understand the elements, the principles and causes of the whole, or even of the parts themselves as they continue to divide into more and more simple parts, all the way down to the most elementary, fundamental level. And then once we're there, and we've done all of that analytical work to then reconstitute the whole, to put all of the parts back together through a process that's called synthesis. If you watch auto racing, and I was raised in a family that owned race cars, when racing teams compete, they don't just show up with a race car, run it around the track, and then see how they do and go home at the end of the day. They have to run a number of different races, qualifying races, time trials and test runs, and then finally the main events. And the cars are often broken down between every race. The car comes in off the track, it's immediately jacked up, wheels are taken off, body panels are taken off, and the crew gets to work breaking down the car, checking all of its parts, and reassembling it for the next race. If you watch drag racing, where they run multiple runs, you'll notice they pull the whole engine apart after each race. And what you see there are master mechanics breaking down the whole into its parts, checking all the parts, making sure everything looks right, recomposing the whole to prepare to compete in each race. Constantly breaking down, rebuilding, breaking down, rebuilding. That's what the masters do in racing. And I think automobiles and mechanics gives us a really clear illustration of what wisdom is. Now take that process and apply it to anything else. Take it to the study of nature. When you stand at your front door and look out the front window, you look at the world as an ignorant person. You look at the world as a whole. You may see trees and refer to them as trees. But you can't say much more about them than the fact that they're trees. Or maybe you can identify one as an evergreen tree, another one as an oak tree. You may know some basic, obvious facts about trees, but you don't know nature. In order to know nature, you're going to have to analyze it. You're going to have to break it down from that ignorant, sensible whole into its true parts. You're going to have to continue analyzing it until you get down to the elements of it, the causes and principles of it, what makes it to be what it is. And then, intellectually, to synthesize that knowledge, to put all those parts back together, and then look at the whole with the knowledge of its elements, principles, and causes, to look at the natural world as a wise man. The ignorant, just to make this clearer, they don't understand the natural world. So, for example, if you want to plant a garden, or I can give an even simpler example. When families think about buying a dog, they think that they would like a dog They think of it as a pet. And they look at all the different breeds of dogs and they ask, what kind of dog should we get? What do you guys want? And the ignorant think of dogs not according to their nature and purpose, but they think of them according to their own vulgar interest and desire. They think of a dog because they think, I'd like a dog that I can go in the backyard and play with. I'd like a dog that I can sit on the couch and cuddle with. I'd like a dog that I can take with me for walks in the morning. The dog is a source of comfort, play, entertainment. That's vulgar. And so they look at a book about dogs or a website about dog breeds, and they're looking at pictures of dogs, thinking, what kind of dog would I like to have for my own purposes? And this is how the vulgar think and live. They don't think of the dogs as creatures that were made by God and designed by God for specific tasks and activities. They simply look at the dogs as possessions, like stuffed animals. And they ask, which dog do I like? Do you like the black dog or the white dog? The long-haired dog or the short-haired dog? The big dog or the small dog? They don't ask, what is this dog's nature? They simply think of what pleasure a certain breed of dog will give them, without even knowing the nature and disposition and habits of the dog, because they're ignorant of its nature. For example, you may think that a border collie or an English shepherd is a beautiful dog, and you may think, oh, I would love to go for a walk in the development with my little border collie on a leash. Let him play in the backyard a little. It sounds nice, and you can picture yourself with this kind of dog, and you like that picture. You think of how the dog will look in your family pictures when you post on Instagram. You're not thinking about the nature of a dog. You're just living your own little vulgar circle and putting a dog into that circle. What you find when you get that dog is that these dogs have real personalities. They're wired and designed, and they have a certain nature, certain instincts that will not necessarily fit into your little plan. A wise man simply seeks to put things where they belong, seeks to order things according to the true order of nature. A wise man would know that a border collie is designed to live on large estates, large farmlands where they're used for herding sheep, running long distances, being trained to follow commands from shepherds. They're extremely athletic, tough, resourceful animals. If you put a border collie in your suburban backyard with a nice little 4-foot fence or maybe even 6-foot fence, you won't be able to contain that border collie. He'll get out of anything you build. I know this from experience because out on the farm, I had an English shepherd, and I put him in a metal wire fence, a chain link fence, that's what it's called, chain link, a chain link kennel. Spent hundreds of dollars on this kennel. That English shepherd didn't want to be in a cage. didn't want to be in that kennel. And he was determined to get out. One morning, I went out to the kennel. The dog was gone. The chain link fence was ripped open. A hole was made in the chain link fence, and the dog was out. We tried keeping the dog in fences in the backyard. The dog would get over any fence, through any gate. Those dogs are made to be free. You're not going to contain a shepherd dog. We had Great Pyrenees dogs. Same kind of thing. It's amazing when you spend time with animals to see how God has designed those animals, how they're created to perform functions in the world. And just because you can get one of these dogs into your car as a puppy and bring it home does not mean that you can make that dog live a life that it's not fitted by nature to live. And so this is how the vulgar look at things. A wise man, as I said before, seeks to order things, not according to his own opinion, not according to his own will, but according to God's intention in all things. So when a wise man looks at a certain thing in the world, he asks, what is God's intention for this thing? And through the study of natural philosophy, he learns the elements, the principles, the causes in the physical world. And that general knowledge, that universal philosophical, scientific knowledge that he obtains, he then applies to his specific activities, his specific responsibilities, his specific possessions. And he seeks to tend and keep the garden, as it were, by guiding it, cultivating in it a harmony with nature in general. This is very clear in farming. If you drive through the country, you'll notice that the farmers all grow the same crops. You drive through and you'll see a field of corn, a field of wheat, a field of soybeans, maybe some fruit orchards here and there, maybe a vineyard here and there. But when you drive through the country, you don't see every single field with a completely different crop, or parts of fields in different crops. You don't see apple trees growing next to tomato trees. You see things are pretty stable, pretty common. And that's because the work of agriculture is ordered by nature. If farmers try to grow things that the land and the climate where they live are not natural, it's impossible to do so profitably. In order to grow something out of season or in an unnatural climate, we have to go to great expenses. We have to build greenhouses. We have to build all kinds of artificial systems, use imported chemicals, fertilizers, and so on. A wise man seeks to maintain harmony between his things and nature at large. He seeks to know the order that exists in the natural world and to bring his life and his activities into harmony with that order. That's not a hippie idea. That's not some kind of climate control, green, activist idea. That's wisdom. To live in harmony with the order that was established in the natural world by the Creator himself. Not to try and live contrary to that order, which simply leads to failure. Unless, as I said, great expenses are made to try and overcome the problems that arise. So we've talked about how this idea of wisdom and true learning through analysis and synthesis applies to a simple mechanical art like auto mechanics. And we've talked a little bit about how it applies to natural philosophy. And that's what we study in classical physics in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Aristotle leads the investigation to analyze the natural world and find what are its elements, principles, and causes. That's the pursuit of natural philosophy. But what if we look to other areas of life? What if we look to our own actions, our own behavior, our own will? And we seek to know what are the elements, the principles, the causes of our moral lives. Well, what we find is another division of philosophy, moral philosophy or ethics. And in the same way, we seek to bring our will, the things that we do and so on, we seek to bring them into harmony with God's will. We seek to live according to nature, according to our purpose, according to the will of the Creator. This is why, as I always repeat, the first principle of ancient philosophy was to know yourself, to know what you are, that you are a creature composed of body and soul, made in the image and likeness of God. That's not some wacky Christian idea. The ancient Greeks, Socrates and Plato, they taught the same thing. This isn't something that you receive by faith, and you only think if you're a Christian, or after you become a Christian, you have to think this. This is what secular philosophers thought before Christianity even arrived. Because it's rational, it's obvious, it's true, it's demonstrable. And if we seek to order our will and our actions, our behavior, our own lives, just as we would order a farm or a garden according to nature, we need to know what the elements, principles, causes of moral activity would be. What is the end of our moral lives? Aristotle says it's true and lasting happiness. What is happiness? Well, the vulgar define happiness in one way, the political define happiness in another way, and the contemplative define happiness in a different way. We have to establish what human happiness is first, and then ask, how do we obtain that happiness? And that's the study of moral philosophy, which, again, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we study in classical ethics. And that goes on through all of the other subjects. How do we order our ideas and thoughts? Well, that's the study of reasoning. That's rational philosophy. We seek to order our thoughts so that we are protected from deception, free from error, and able to solve problems, find solutions, answer questions without error. We seek to understand how to use the faculty of reason that we're born with through the study of that faculty. And the philosophers explain that what causes reason to be the most extraordinary of all powers is that it's the only power that examines and investigates itself. And so in rational philosophy or reasoning, we seek to understand the art and science of reasoning itself. Now again, we do that in reasoning studies, in language studies, in the art of grammar. And then as our ideas and thoughts relate to other people, we study that through the art of rhetoric. And so there are physical and natural issues that we study through natural philosophy. Then there are purely speculative issues that we consider through these studies like reasoning. But then there are studies that deal with issues that are sort of in between the two. And these are called mathematical issues. They relate to questions of quantity. Mathematical issues are both physical and not physical at the same time. And we study the different divisions of quantity in the quadrivium: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And this is where the classical Catholic curriculum comes from. It's nothing other than the course of studies that are necessary for the pursuit of true wisdom. Not wisdom in one area only, some kind of specialization. The only reason that anyone would be interested in specializing is for the sake of money-making. And Socrates used to regularly prove how foolish it was to specialize, because the specialist takes so many general things for granted and can't even answer questions about life or purpose, and yet is pursuing this one specific thing with all his might, not even knowing where he's going or whether what he's doing is good. Modern learning, we see, is all about specialization. It's all about choosing your major, choosing your specialty, choosing your area of expertise. And the only reason that that's done is for the sake of some kind of money-making. It's not good for your life to be a specialist unless all you need is money. And of course, it's not true that all a human being needs is money. It's not good to be a specialist. A wise man will find that once a man gains wisdom, once he learns how to gain wisdom, he learns wisdom in many different subjects. And that's why when you look in the ancient world, you'll see that Aristotle dominates every subject. Who is the great classical biologist? Aristotle. Moral philosopher? Aristotle. Natural philosopher? Aristotle. Logician? Aristotle. On and on. It's because Aristotle discovered and developed the method of philosophical investigation, or the pursuit of wisdom, And as soon as he developed the tool, as it was, he then had the advantage of being able to put it to work. And that's why he leads, or is the great master, the great philosopher, who teaches so many different subjects. People often ask me how I'm able to teach the entire Classical Liberal Arts Academy curriculum, whether you're studying Latin grammar or algebra or natural philosophy or rhetoric or sacred scripture. I can tutor and teach every subject in the entire curriculum. And the answer is because my pursuit in learning is true wisdom. I'm not interested in being a specialist for the sake of a job. I'm interested in wisdom for the sake of my own life, my own happiness. And if you present me with an individual subject or issue, I know the universal principles, I know the method of investigation, and I can begin the work of analyzing an issue, dividing it into its parts, learning its elements, principles, and causes, and gaining wisdom in that individual subject. What I learn as a classicist has helped me, for example, to become a professional level website developer. The same method, analysis and synthesis, applied to a new area. It's what allowed me to build and operate a farm, even though I grew up in central New Jersey. When it was time for me to get into farming, I took my philosophical knowledge with me, all of the general principles, all of the basics of the method of investigation, and I applied them to the work of the farm. That's the benefit of wisdom. That's why the Proverbs tells us wisdom is more valuable than anything else. Because if you have wisdom, you have everything. That's how man is made to live. That's what the book of Proverbs is teaching us. When God gave Solomon the opportunity to ask for anything he wanted, Solomon proved himself to be wise by asking for wisdom. Because if he has wisdom, he can handle everything. But if he asks for one specific thing and then doesn't have wisdom, even that will end up being lost. He asked for wisdom. He sought wisdom. True wisdom is the knowledge of the elements, principles, and causes of any subject. It's understanding the why. And this is why Aristotle said that a man can demonstrate his understanding in any subject when he's able to teach and explain it to others. This is true wisdom. And it's gained through this work of analysis and synthesis. Now, the question that a student asked me about today that relates to this comes out of Aristotle's writing. Aristotle speaks of, he uses a phrase that says, some things are known to us, and some things are known to nature. The ignorant have the first kind of knowledge. The wise have the second kind of knowledge. The ignorant know things as they are known to man, that is, as they appear to the ignorant through the senses. The first kind of knowledge, and I talked about this before when I talked about my wife's knowledge of an automobile. She knows a thing according to its appearances to the senses. That's the knowledge of those who don't actually know. A good illustration I always give of this is when if I ask someone, do you know what a cat is? And everyone will say, yes, I know what a cat is. And then I'll say, take a pencil and piece of paper and draw a cat. And all of a sudden we find that we can't draw the cat. And what everyone does is they say, oh, well, I'm not good at drawing. But that's not true. Your inability to draw the cat, your inability to even sketch the cat in any kind of realistic way contradicts your claim to know what a cat is. You know basic details, just a few basics about the whole of a cat. But when it's time to actually set those parts in their places and draw different parts of the body with ratio to one another, you can't do it because really you don't know the cat. This is the knowledge of the ignorant. It's a vague kind of exaggerated familiarity. This is the kind of knowledge that people commonly have of things. It's the knowledge of the vulgar. It's the kind of knowledge that you see on social media arguing about all of the political controversies about vaccines and COVID and what the Pope said here and this problem and that problem and global warming and all of these political controversies and arguments in the news media, on social media. This is all the ignorant wrangling of people who have no idea what they're actually talking about. It's none of their business. None of them have any wisdom that commends them as experts on any of these subjects. The problem with them is that they think they know. And think about Socrates. What was it that Socrates said made him the wisest man in the world? It was that he was the only man who knew that he didn't know anything. Because that's the proper disposition of one who seeks wisdom. To assume he doesn't know, to question, to reason, to listen, to gather information, not to ignorantly start arguing and just assume that you've got it all figured out when there's not a single thing that suggests that you actually do have it all figured out. That's what the vulgar do. And if you ask, why are they arguing? They're arguing about how much they have to pay in taxes. They're arguing about what happens to the money that they make at work because they would like to upgrade their cable TV service, but they can't because of taxation, and the taxes go to the public schools and they go to welfare people, so they hate welfare services. They're complaining about their frustrations because they're not able to have as much comfort, as much of an undisturbed life, as much pleasure as they might have, as they want. And so they fight with people, not over philosophical ideas, not over religious ideas, but over stuff. That's what they're actually fighting about. They're just fighting about stuff with other people. The kind of knowledge that the wise have is knowledge as things are known to nature. That is, the knowledge of things as God himself would see them. God says throughout the Bible that he does not see things as man sees. And when he says that, he doesn't mean wise men. He means common men. God doesn't look at things. God doesn't understand things. God doesn't see things as men generally see them. The wise see things as God sees them. The wise strive and study to see things as God sees them. And whereas we as Christians might speak in those terms, we might say, I want to know nature as God knows nature. I want to understand how to manage livestock according to God's intention for these animals. I want to live a life according to God's will. As Christians, we talk about these things in religious terms. But the philosophers spoke of them in philosophical terms. So Aristotle wouldn't say we want to understand things as they are known to God. He would say we want to understand things as they are known to nature. That is, as they truly are, not as they might appear to the senses. The ignorant look at things and see holes. They don't recognize distinctions. They're not able to make divisions. They look and they see holes and they categorize things loosely and generally. They don't know the true order of things. They don't know the true division of genera into species. They don't truly know things. If you look at the diagrams and the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, you see the sketching and how much effort they put into studying all of the parts. They might be painting a picture of a woman in a dress or a man clothed in armor, but they're diagramming how the ribs would be drawn and the fibers of the muscles, the bones. In order to draw the man, they have to master the parts, the elements of the forms and the movements, the perspectives and so on. We find the masters not merely sketching external outlines like we do as children or as unskilled artists. We see the master artist almost drawing the thing from the inside out, thinking of the parts, drafting and sketching the parts in order to synthesize the whole. That's wisdom. That's the knowledge that's pursued by wise men. So to answer this question, what does it mean for something to be known to us and something to be known to nature? Known to us means to know a thing as it appears to men at first sight, as a whole. That's not scientific knowledge. That's not wisdom. And it's often false. That's how we're deceived and misled and make all kinds of errors by judging things according to first appearances. That's how sophists are able to deceive men. That's how the devil is able to tempt us by misleading us as we live according to what's known to us, rather than to what is known to God or what is known to nature. And through philosophy, we seek to learn, to understand things not as they're known to us, to men, by our senses, on first appearances, but to understand them as they truly are, as they are known to God, or as they are known to nature itself. There's an illustration that gets passed around that I just want to mention real quickly. There's an illustration, a story that's told where there's a boy looking up, and I don't know if it's his mother or his grandmother or someone who is stitching, embroidering some image. And I'm not an expert in all of this needlework, so I don't know the correct terms for things, but let's say cross-stitching. Making some image, some tapestry. And the little boy is looking up and he sees the bottom of this work that's being done, and there's loose strings and it looks messy and ugly from beneath. And he's thinking, why would his mother or grandmother, whoever the worker is, why would they be making this ugly thing, this ugly, confusing thing? And so he asks, what are you making? It doesn't look nice. And then the woman turns the work over and lets him see the other side. And he sees this beautiful tapestry, this beautiful needlework being done. To see the work from our perspective, from underneath, it doesn't look as it truly is. And it's only when we learn to see it from the vantage point of the artist, of the wise person, that we understand what's actually being made, what actually exists. And that illustration is used in Christian circles just to make a vague point that we don't understand what God's doing, and it's sort of like this normal comforting of the ignorant masses as they try to figure out what's going on in their lives without wisdom. There's all these illustrations and cute stories, but you see that there's an underlying need, and that is that we have to seek wisdom. Because if we don't have wisdom, we don't understand things as they are. We don't understand how to live. We don't understand what we should be doing. What kind of works should we be doing? This is the kind of knowledge that we find lacking so terribly among modern Christians. They're just following unbelievers because they don't know what to do. They don't have wisdom. They've all bought into this lie that if Christians simply get the same education that the world gets, everything's okay, because all God cares about is that you get a job and pay your bills. But when we get into that life and start to live it, we find that this isn't at all what we need. A man can't raise a family without wisdom. If he doesn't know moral philosophy, if he doesn't know sacred scripture and theology, he can't raise Christian children. A mother can't manage a household without a knowledge of natural philosophy. Without a knowledge of moral philosophy, she can't manage children. This idea that if you pay the rent and have enough money for groceries and clothes that you'll be good to go is just a lie. Life is far more complicated, far more challenging than that. We have to have wisdom, or we can't fulfill the purpose of our lives. So we seek not to live according to what is known to us or to men, but through philosophical study to understand things as they are known to God or to nature, as it was designed by God. That's what that expression means in Aristotle. Now, we get this education, we get this wisdom through the study of the classical Catholic curriculum, not a fake one. If you study a fake classical curriculum, you'll find that it doesn't address the problem. It's just rebranding the same ignorant modern school program, and it doesn't address the real needs. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy teaches the real classical liberal arts, the real classical philosophical sciences, and real Catholic theology. And we teach it for this purpose, that we may be wise. Now, if you study and grow in the mastery of these arts and sciences, you'll learn to live very differently. You'll learn to be like Socrates and always assume that you don't know. Like in baseball, if you play in the outfield, if someone hits a fly ball, the coaches teach you to always make your first step backwards, to always make sure the ball doesn't get over your head. If it drops, at least let it drop in front of you. A wise man thinks like an outfielder. When he's asked a question or when he hears a controversy, his first step is always backwards. He listens first. He researches first. He studies and meditates first. This is what St. James says in the New Testament. He says, "Be slow to speak, but quick to listen." When men who had classical liberal arts education wished to enter the church in the early centuries of the church, St. Augustine wrote that if a man with a classical education came to the church seeking baptism, he shouldn't be made to go through the normal initiation process, which we might compare to the RCIA program in the modern church. St. Augustine said there's no need for a liberally educated man to go through that process, because if and when he comes to the church requesting baptism, he'll have already investigated it himself before he makes the decision to enter the church. Whereas an ignorant person might be moved by grace and actually need to know what it is that he's signing up for, a liberally educated man, Augustine taught, doesn't need to go through that same process because he's already done the deliberation on his own. The research is already finished. And that's why so many of the early church fathers were philosophers first who became Christians. And it's almost as soon as they became Christians, they became leaders because of their classical education. Think of St. Paul the Apostle. He goes from persecuting Jew to teacher in an instant. But the wise man always takes his first steps backward. He always learns and listens, prepares arguments, analyzes, consults before he answers, before he speaks. And what wisdom will teach you is to be quiet. It'll teach you to step back from all of the arguing and controversies. You'll see how terribly ignorant almost all of the public discourse is. You'll see how prejudiced it is. You'll see how overly simplified the positions are. You'll see how many fallacies fill the conversation, not just of unbelievers, but of Christians, even of leading celebrity Christians, how truly ignorant and irrational they are. And you'll be challenged to think through issues that you would be inclined to think you already have figured out and learn that you're wrong. I've had to learn this on a number of issues. One time in a debate in a class that I was teaching, one of the dangers of teaching the kids well is that they begin to hold you accountable and they get pretty sharp. And one of my students actually caught me on a point where what I was saying, which seemed to be so right and obvious, which is why I was saying it, was actually contradicted in the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas. And I didn't know that. You'll often learn when you analyze the issues, when you break them down and take the time and do the work to get all the details, to get all the information, to really break a topic into all of its parts, to go through that work of analysis, to get all the way down to the elements, principles, and causes. You'll find that the truth is very often other than you initially would have thought it was. You'll learn to be much less eager to judge. You'll be much less eager to get into arguments with common people who you know aren't philosophers, aren't theologians. And when I say philosophers and theologians, I don't just mean men who have gone to modern colleges and gotten degrees, because that proves nothing. I mean men who you know have devoted their lives to real philosophical study, to living according to wisdom, who study theology, who study sacred scripture and are masters of it, like the apostle said of the man Apollos in the book of Acts, that he was a master of the scriptures. You'll know when people in your life are masters. You'll know by the way they talk. You'll know by the clarity with which they speak, by the exactness with which they write and speak. And you'll learn to spend more time in solitude, praying, studying, writing, thinking, and hardly any time in company, especially not arguing with common people about controversies that no one has any clue what they're talking about with regard to. And that's how true wisdom changes your life. It makes you much more open-minded in that you're willing to hear every position. You're always interested in hearing both sides. You're always interested in taking time to reflect, to research, to consult. And you're never interested in sharing your own opinion, because that's irrelevant. You're never interested in casting your judgment on the spot, like shooting from the hip. That's how fools live. A fool's desire is only to speak his own mind. That's not the life of a wise man. I find myself, the more I study, the more I grow in wisdom, the more I find myself saying, I don't know, when I'm asked questions. My kids will ask me questions, and I'll hear people start answering all their questions and telling them this and that. And I don't know the answer to the question they're asking. And I certainly don't know how these other people would know the answer to the question they're asking. The wiser I get, the more I learn, the more I find myself answering, I don't know. Not because I'm an agnostic, not because I believe that it's unknowable, but simply because I haven't done the work to know with certainty that I have the answer to that question. Like Socrates, when we become wise, we realize much of what we think we know is simply opinion. It's simply repeating things that we've heard without any critical examination, without any actual philosophical or scientific knowledge. And as we study more and grow in wisdom, we become more sensitive to that reality. And we're slow to speak and quick to listen. I speak through these walk talks, and it's about the only time I speak. I spend all of my time reading and studying and working. And usually I'll take one topic a day and think through it out loud. But like I said, the more that I learn, the more I grow, the more I find myself saying that I don't know. Because I have to study, I have to research, I have to consult, I have to examine and compare, and I have to hear all sides of the argument. I have to go and get the answers. I don't know off the top of my head. There's hardly any subjects that I'm ready to say, I know off the top of my head and would be able to provide evidence for. That's the other problem with the common knowledge and talk, is that when you ask for evidence, there's none. People just pass around statements from one person to another as if they've been proven, and when you ask for evidence, you find that none of the things being said have ever been tested. None of them have been demonstrated. None of them have been examined. There's never been evidence required or provided. People are just passing around assertions as if they're self-evident, or as if everyone's already seen the proof. This is especially true in modern science. It's also true in religious discussions. People will say things like, oh, well, the church teaches. Well, I'd like to see the evidence that shows the church, and not just your chosen celebrity pastor of the week, has actually taught this or that. Because I rarely find anyone prepared to provide evidence. And they'll admit it. They'll say, well, you can see it on YouTube. Well, why would you go around asserting something when you can't furnish any evidence for it? Wise men don't do that. Wisdom and true learning will make you much less eager to answer questions, to get involved in arguments, because after all, you'd be much better off going and studying than arguing. So anyway, that's what I'd like to say today with regard to true wisdom, how true wisdom is obtained, and as we begin to obtain true wisdom, how it changes our lives. I hope that that's helpful. God bless.